Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is that you're watching our video today. I have with me Tia Payne, who is an author, an advocate, a mother, a wife, and a survivor of domestic abuse. She is also the executive director of Legacy 31. Welcome, Tia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. So, I wanted to have you on the show today because October is the month for domestic violence, and your organization does a lot to work with domestic violence survivors. And I really wanted you to share your story and just to, tell us what you do in your organization, how it came about, and so how did Legacy 31 begin?
So, Legacy 31 began because I was raised in an abusive household, and I grew up to repeat the cycle. And I guess a little twist to my story is my father, who was our abuser growing up, he was the pastor of the church that we attended. Sunday mornings we had church preaching, praise and worship. And then when we would come home, it would be like a totally different guy. He would turn into this mean, hateful, physically, emotionally, mentally, verbally abusive person. So back then, I didn't know anything of what battered women shelters. I didn't know about hotlines. And granted, I was a child, but it wasn't something that we heard of. If we ever did have to leave, we would go to families' houses. So we never went to like a shelter or received any services due to what we were going through. So
Hmm.
then, of course, I grow up. My very first marriage, I repeat the cycle, someone in the church or religious, for the lack of a better word. And there was still no services that I knew of. I went to my church leadership and I was told that, I needed to pray, that God was going to work the situation
Hmm.
out. I was told, that maybe I needed to submit. And so there was never really any counsel, so to speak, about seeking safety or giving me any resources. So I began my career once I separated from my first husband. I actually began a career in the advocacy field. And so I was actually a child advocate because at the time I was still, trying to learn about what I went through as a kid growing up. I hadn't really
Yeah.
connected the dots to my marriage. So I became a child advocate for a program called Children Who Witness Violence. And we worked very closely with the battered women's shelter in Summit County. So a lot of my clients were in shelter and different things like that. And that actually helped me start getting a better understanding of what domestic violence was and how that looks for a child being abused. And so I started, volunteering in a shelter, picking up shifts, working in a shelter. So I got immersed into what the domestic violence field looks like. And so
Hmm.
that just opened up amazing things for me as far as, on a journey of, healing and trying to figure out, what was wrong in my life. And so after years of working there, learning, growing, healing, divorcing, all of that, being a
So
part of that agency. Yes.
let me interrupt just real quickly. So during this
Mhm.
time that you're working for this organization, are you still married to the person that you're being abused by?
Yes, I was still married, but I had left. I had separated from him. I
Hmm.
was raised to believe in our household that you could not get a divorce. And being, a
Wow.
woman of faith, I didn't want God to be displeased with me if I did get a divorce. So my thought process was, well, I'll divorce and I'll live separate because I didn't want to be abused. I didn't want to be treated that way. Just a whole mental thing. I didn't want to go through that anymore. So I left. I separated from my ex-husband at that point, and I just left. Like I packed up my two children that we had from the marriage, and we drove to California. We was out.
Mm.
Um, but I never had any intentions on divorcing. I just felt like, well, God, if you're telling me I can't get a divorce, I'm gonna just be separated the rest of my life. And so that's how
Hmm.
I proceeded. It wasn't
So
until. Mhm.
so during the time when you decided to leave, What was going through your mind when you packed up your kids?
At that point, honestly, actually caused me to leave is he had a gun in the house that I didn't know about, and he actually he didn't wave it at me in my face, so to speak, but there was an incident where, a lot of arguing and accusations flying back and forth, and he ran upstairs and got the gun I didn't know he had. And he started making like verbal threats, and I heard the gun cock. And so at
Mhm.
that point, I'm like, what just happened? I need to get out of here. So I just got my keys and we got in my car and we left and went to my brother's house at that point. And so we stayed at my brother's house, I want to say probably about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks. And then when I was sure he was not in the home, I went and packed everything up that I could. And that's when I ended up driving to California. But I just needed safety.
Yeah.
My thought process was, he could hurt me, kill me. Our kids, they were babies. They were maybe a year old. And so I was thinking of how I could safely get out of that situation with, you're not going to harm me. I'm going to fight till the end, and I might be able to turn the tables, and I might kill you. And I just
Hmm.
didn't want that. So I thought it best, if even if I couldn't get a divorce, I still needed to leave. And so I left.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I kind of remember you have military training. Am I right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. It did. For some reason, just came to me. So it is very possible that it could have been a dangerous situation for him.
Right. Yes.
Hmm. So you're in California. So what's next?
So I'm in California. Really just at that point, I was just really trying to find some mental peace.
Hmm.
I was thousands of miles away from him. I was thousands of miles away from his family, and I needed some peace. So when I was out there, I went on I need to find out who Tia is again. You don't realize that when you're in situations like that, you can be a very strong person, you can be a very confident person, but when you end up in a situation where there's a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, you literally can lose yourself. And that's what happened. I lost myself. I was very surprised to find out that I just kind of existed. And so it wasn't until I went to California and even though I was still married, it was like, well, I'm no longer a wife. What do Tia like to do?
Hmm.
What does she like to eat? What does she like to watch on TV? And so I was able to start rediscovering those things about me,
Uh-huh.
and gain my confidence back, just really find me again. But in the process of living there, although I found all of those things back, I discovered my father was still my father, and he was still very abusive to my mom.
Wow.
He was very verbally abusive to me at one point while I was out there, and it started transferring to my children.
Hmm.
Because I stayed with him when I first went out there. I eventually got my own place trying to separate. But he was my father was very narcissistic too. And so some of the same traits I seen as a kid growing up, now I'm seeing that's how he's doing my children, specifically my son. And so I just couldn't, he started, threatening and just trying to be controlling to my life as a grown person. So I packed up again at that point, after I had been out in California probably about 2 years. I packed up again, me and my children. I packed us up and we got back in our car and we drove back to Ohio. But coming back towards Ohio, I'm a new Tia at this point. I got a different mindset. I'm no longer depressed. I'm no longer having, suicidal ideations or none of that. I'm back for all intents and purposes. So when I came back, I was kind of ready to tackle the whole divorce issue. I still had my reservations. I'm still like, it's got to be something better. I would want to move on. I want to date again.
Hmm.
And so I came back, and me and my children, we got settled. They were turning 3. We got settled, and I actually joined a church here in Akron. And I had been attending the church probably for some months. And I told people, I didn't tell people my history of what was going on. I just told people I was married.
Okay.
And I ended up meeting with the pastor at the church, because he was just, kind of asking like, I heard you were married. Like, where's your husband at? And so I opened up to the pastor, and I kind of told him, we were separated, and, kind of told him some of the things that were going on. And so he asked me, he said, well, why are you not divorced if all that's going on? And I'm like, well, I mean, I heard I couldn't, that God didn't allow divorces, and, just a lot of religious beliefs and stuff that you're raised with. And so I was telling him that. And so all he asked me, he said, can you please show me where that is in the Bible? And so I was just kind of stunned at that point, like, I don't believe I've ever read this. And I'm looking at him. He said, no, here's a Bible. I need you to show me. And so, of course, I did my due diligence. Like, I know it's not in here, but let me act like I'm looking for it. And so him asking me that question kind of opened up something else for me, because I'm like, that's really not in the Bible. That's, people teach that way, but would God really want me to stay in an abusive situation and be abused the rest of my life? That's not the God I know. And so it was a lot of coming to terms with, my parents, who spoke from their truth, even though it was based on false information, wrestling with that. But it was just enough for me to be like, the very next day I went and filed for divorce. So that opened up a whole new world of what my relationship with God was like, how I could proceed with my life, not being, attached to someone in a senseless marriage that wasn't going anywhere, that was abusive. Like, even at that point, we're separated, but we couldn't be in the same room without him going at me. So it was toxic, for lack of a better word. It was very, very toxic. So, once I had that meeting, I literally filed for my divorce the very next day. And it took 3 months from that point of me filing. I want to say that was in October of 2006. I filed for divorce, and it was official January 2007. It might have been January 2008, so it might be 2007 and 2008. And from there, soon after that, honestly, is when I ended up getting the job with not getting the job, but learning more and more about domestic violence, because I ended up taking a full-time job in an actual shelter. Like, I left from being a youth advocate, and I took the full-time job. So now I'm immersed in shelter life. And so just at that point, a lot of different things, start happening. I ended up remarrying at this point. Still, and it's so funny to say that although I remarried, and this marriage is totally different than my first marriage, I'm still learning about domestic violence and the effects it can have on you. I'm still learning Tia and why Tia do the things that she do based off of how I was raised and the abuse I experienced as a child. I'm still learning. But at that point, I had a heart ready.
Let's back up for one moment, because I do want to touch on the new marriage and everything. But I want to know, what was the most difficult thing in leaving from the abusive situation?
Honestly, really thinking that my relationship with God was going to be affected because I left. I was taught to be a good Christian wife, that I had to submit. Submission has a very, very bad connotation to it, especially when you think Christian marriages, so to speak, unless you have a good understanding of what marriage is. And so that was the hardest part. God, are you still going to love me? God, are you still going to be pleased with me if I leave this situation? So my happy medium was just separating and not divorcing at that time. Wow. I wrestled with that decision a very, very long time before I decided to do anything. And it was very, very hard. My family was not in agreement, because, again, I'm raised in this Christian preaching family where you stay in your marriages and you allow God to work out your marriages, good, bad, and ugly.
So when you say your family, like, specifically, was it your parents? Was it your siblings?
I'll say more of my parents. I had quieter opinions from my siblings. I won't say they judged me per se, but again, we were all raised the same way. We were all raised the same way. So it's like, ooh, Tia getting a divorce. It was more like that. My parents, although they knew what was going on in my marriage, and they didn't like it, even though my dad was an abuser, it was still frowned upon for me to actually leave the marriage, or divorce.
To me, that is just so crazy that your parents who are in an abusive relationship, like, and your mom who could understand and relate to what you're going through, encourage you to stay in the situation.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did that impact your relationship with your mom?
Me and my mom actually, we were okay. She didn't agree with my decision. And then she was also still in California at the time as well. She didn't necessarily agree with my decision, but we didn't have a serious falling out until I actually chose to remarry. Because at
Hmm.
this point, now you're not only did you divorce, but now you're remarrying when you're not even supposed to remarry after, so then that kind of took it to a whole new level. And so she did not come to my wedding. She refused to come because she thought it was sinful for me to be remarrying. So
Hmm.
she didn't come, and we didn't speak. Probably I was probably remarried closer to almost 2 years before we found common ground. And it actually helped that she liked my husband. She
Okay.
actually liked him. And so he actually kind of broke the ice more so than, me and her coming to terms with our relationship, so to speak.
So what religion is this? Because I know when people are going to watch this, they're going to say, what religion was this?
Non-denomination. So
Okay.
Christian we were Christian. We were not necessarily raised in the Baptist church. We always told people, no, we're non-denominational. We're Christian.
Mm, okay. So you move from this abusive relationship and you meet this new guy or a guy who you've known but
Right.
reconnected with.
Yes.
Because I know
Hmm.
some of the story. So you guys
Yeah.
reconnected
Yeah.
and y'all get married. So let's take it from there.
So he how we ended up, like, we never really disconnected from each other because we were actually really, really good friends. Um, so even through my marriage and everything, we still talked. I still seen his family. We still did all of that. He was actually the first person I called when I was coming back to Ohio. He was the first person I called. Actually, before I could tell him, I called and I said, "Hey, I got some news." He said, "What? You moving back, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah. How did you know?" He said he had a dream that I called and told him. So I
Mm-hmm.
moved back, and we kind of started dating. Like, we dated in college, but then we started dating again. But then at this point, I'm also at this transition of, what is my relationship with God like? I really
Mm-hmm.
want to solidify my relationship with God. So not we went our separate ways as far as dating is concerned. And then we ended up at the same church. So I went to this church, the Burning Bush Church. I went to that church, and I'm there, really, looking to God and getting some direction from God. And lo and behold, he visits the church with one of his friends and never left. And then we got married. So I mean, we just kind of rekindled from there, and ended up getting married in '09. '09.
Wow, wow. So with this new marriage, you talked about you're still learning how your past relationships impact you till this day. What are some of those triggers or what are some of those nuances that you realize, hey, this is a result of what happened from my
Right.
past marriage, and I don't want to bring it into my new marriage, but like this is that thing that
Hmm.
I know should not be impacting this relationship.
Honestly, it was my children before, because I was raised in an abusive household. My discipline style was almost non-existent when it came to my twins. Um, Not only was I trying to overcompensate because it was just everything bad with their father.
Hmm.
So here I am in this new marriage, and I'm looking like, you can't tell my kids what to do, type of thing. And it wasn't a blend. Like, you have to blended families. Like, you have to blend. But I was very protective of my children. I was very, very protective. And that was one of those triggers that I'm like, okay, this is a totally different person. But if I could be honest, it took years before I was able to be in a space to say, he's not abusing my children, he's helping me raise my children. I was always
Hmm.
protective of them, based off of how I was raised and everything that happened with their dad. So once I was able to kind of really, and this took some healing as well. Once I was able to realize that I use my children as what happened to me. It could be any little thing. Like, okay, you're on punishment. You, I don't know, wrote on the wall type of stuff. It could be just like little things,
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't coming from me as their actual biological parent. I'm like, oh my God, why did you tell my kids that? And so it was very, very hard in the beginning for us to blend with me having that attitude. I was in protective mode. I had went down there with my parents, and my dad started treating my children, the same way he treated me as growing up. So I was very protective of them. I was in that mode. They were spoiled, because I overcompensated and I protected them from a lot. And so we really had to work on that. But first, I had to actually work on me and come to terms with this new word I had learned along the way called domestic violence that I had never heard. And I had to apply it to my life and accept that, yes, Tia, you were abused. It's okay that you were abused, but what are you going to do from this point forward to aid in the point of your healing so you can be free from all that, trauma and toxicity and everything that you went through? How are you going to be productive as well as now you're remarried? So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that fell on me.
Wow. So I know that your new husband has to be very patient.
Hmm.
Um, talk about his patience. What was mm, because when people watch this, I really want this to be like educational because so many people go through this, and a lot of people now have blended families, and they may not know how to connect with each other, especially when you talk about kids. And these are my kids, but wait, the other person might feel, well, I feel like they're our kids. I know they're
Right.
not, biologically mine, but I accepted them as my own. And
Hmm.
so, what is some of the, I guess, guidance that you can let other people know?
I would say if you have the mindset that you don't want someone other than a biological parent to help you raise your children, then don't get married to somebody.
Mhm.
Because I think that it's detrimental, especially for kids. My kids were 5, I believe they were 5 when I remarried. And so he came at a crucial point in their life. But not only that, we have been dating since they were 3.
Mm.
So we're at a crucial point in their life, where he had been their father figure for quite some time anyway. He was the guy that, came to sports events and, all of that. Um, so I would just really say that you have to be prepared to think as a unit when it comes to blending a family, especially when there's children involved, when there's a outside party involved, like my ex-husband. He had a very big issue with the fact that I'm remarried and there's another man in the house that plays the role of a father to his
Mhm.
children. Um, you have to be prepared for some of those things, and coming in with a lot of baggage won't help at all. You have to be, if you've come from a abusive background and then there's children involved, and you have to be at a good point of healing to really walk into that. It was helpful to me that this had been my best friend since I was 18. Like he's known me since I first went to step on Akron Union's campus, pretty much. So I think that was helpful in our situation. If I could be honest, if it had not been him, I don't think my marriage would have survived with everything that I was dealing with, and just really not being ready to accept him in that part of my life when it came to my children, dealing with everything else that I was dealing with. I think it was because we had an actual relationship outside of us dating. If we hadn't had that, I to be honest, I highly doubt we would have survived. And then, we both had a relationship with God too. And I think that was one of our biggest helps, is because we did have that. We did have good examples at the church that we were going through. We did have marriage counseling. We had some of those things in place. And so I think that gave us a couple steps up.
Mhm.
But if I could give somebody some advice, make sure you're already there before you get in, and you have to learn to get there.
Mhm. So how did this impact the kids, the twins?
Well, with the twins, because their dad was actually, he still had visitation with them, it was a hot mess.
Mm,
It was very, even that was very, very toxic, because you have Tia and Julius's household of, kids go to bed at a certain time. Y'all not running the street type stuff. And granted, they were little, so just, just doing kid stuff. And then you had, oh, we're going over our dad's house where dad lets us do anything. And, if I want to have donuts and juice for breakfast, lunch, and
mm,
dinner, I can have donuts and juice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He was the type of person that any structure that I had at my house, he would do total opposite just
mm.
to create issues.
Yeah.
Um, and so for the twins, that back and forth, sometimes he's here consistently, and then it might be 8 or 9 months before they see him again outside of talking on the phone. But you don't have to listen to him. That's not your father. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. Remember, that's not your father. I'm your father, and as your father, if I say you don't got to do that and you don't got to listen to him, you don't got to listen to him. So we went through that for years.
That is just crazy. Like I know this stuff
Mhm.
happens. It's just crazy that things like this happen. And I
Right.
just feel is just so important. To get these type of conversations out there, these stories to let people know that they're not alone.
Right.
That so for those people who are watching this and they're experiencing this or going through this, what are some of the resources that are out there?
Well, now you have a national domestic violence hotline number, that you can always access, and every city, county, dependent should have they have some type of local resources available, either a shelter that you can call to go to for safety. Um, but what the National Domestic Violence Hotline number does is it's available. If you've never heard about domestic violence resources, I don't know what hotline, that's a local number for me to call. If you don't have those things, you can call this one number and tell them, this is where I live. Can you point me in a direction of my local resources? And that
Hmm.
number will get you to local resources. Now, if there's children involved, children's services in itself, CPS, any of those type of connotations, they have a bad name. Most people assume they're coming to take your kids away, which they are
Yeah.
not trying to do. Their
Hmm.
purpose is strictly to actually keep the family unit together. So
Hmm.
I give a lot of resources. Please call your local children's services number, because when it comes to kids, they are a very, very big help. They've dealt with these situations. They're not coming looking to see if you got dirt on your walls. That's not their purpose. Um, and then, although domestic violence is still a very taboo subject, and a lot of people still don't want to talk about it or have these type of conversations, it's made enough of strides, especially when it comes to the impact it have on children, that children's services, they stand up now. They're like, let me get you this service. And they don't forget the children. A lot of times when you're in a domestic violence situation, I'm in the domestic violence situation, I'm being abused, you're not necessarily thinking of the impact that it has on your children. So getting your local children's services involved to get them the services they need, as well as getting you the services you need, is crucial in, breaking the cycle and healing for both you and your children. It's very, very crucial. I learned after the fact, but yes, I still took my children to counseling so they could talk about some of the things that they heard their dad say, some of the things that they may have seen. I put them through a crisis children's council, so they would be able to express themselves and talk about some of the things that they wouldn't necessarily talk to me about as their mother.
Hmm. So for the person who is so afraid to get out of the situation, what's the first step?
Calling your local battered women shelter. A lot of times, they're people in those situations. They're not going to call the police. They're just not. They have a distrust of police. I'll be honest. Women can be abusers as well, and so now when the police come out and they're out at a domestic violence call, it's not I'm automatically looking at the guy as the abuser. I'm trying to assess which one of you are the abuser. And so
Hmm.
it a lot of times women feel, and unfortunately there has been those cases where the woman has been named the aggressor, even if she's trying to defend herself. The police are looking at, okay, he had 5 scratches down his face from, fingernails and whatever else that you did. and you have nothing, so you're the aggressor in our eyes because you drew blood on him, even though you were defending yourself. And so sometimes women in that situation end up distrustful that the police won't believe them, so they won't call the police. But my suggestion is calling your battered women's shelter, because they can walk you through court systems. They can walk you through getting protection orders. They can do all of that if you're fearful of calling the police.
Mm-hmm. So this next question is going to be for the family members or friends who may think that domestic violence is going on. So what are some of the signs family and friends should look for?
Isolation. They're not calling us anymore. They're not coming to family functions. They appear scared of whoever their abuser is. Like they're very timid, unsure of themselves around the abuser. If they start wearing, it's 90 degrees outside, but they have long sleeves on and long pants, they might be trying to hide bruises and different things like that. And then if I could just encourage family and friends, a lot of times it takes a long time to leave an abusive relationship. Most relationships never, ever, ever start out toxic. They just never do. Every person puts their best self forward in their relationships. I'm this great guy. I'm this great girl. We don't find out the bad stuff until we've been in the relationship and we fell in love with the representation of who you showed me on day one. That's who I fell in love with. That's who I like. So that's what I'm going to remember when things start going bad. So although I may leave, you may know how to pull me back by, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on, I had a bad day, it'll never happen again. I love you, you know what, and I remember all the good times, so you know what, let me go back and see if it's okay. And so sometimes it takes people 7, 8 times before they officially leave for good. And for family and friends, they're tired of it. Why can't you leave? Get away from that person. That's not what that person needs. And us on the outside looking into that abusive situation, like, I would never have somebody treat me that way. I would never do. And they name all these things that they would never do. I named all these things that I would never do. And then when I was in that situation, it was totally different. So just having that support system of non-judgment from our family and friends, that's actually the most help someone needs to actually be able to leave their abusive situation. The judgment, the you stupid for staying, and why would you let somebody treat you that does not help. That actually pushes them closer to the abuser, because I'm the only one love you and I got all these people against you. So I got to make sure I protect you and you got to be safe, even if it's the abuser. We still have feelings regardless of how they treated us. We still love that. Same difference with kids. Kids still love their parents regardless of how toxic they may be.
Yeah. I think for people on the outside looking in, it is frustrating, because you can see it, you understand, you see the abuse, and you like, why is this person allowing this to happen? Especially people who you know to be boisterous, independent, strong, and you're like, this is not the person that I know.
Correct.
And so, because I know someone who was in, a situation, it's just like, this is frustrating. Like, why can't you just get out,
Yeah, honestly, I tell people all the time, like when I answer hotline calls, people say, well, what can I do to help? They're not listening to me. I say, be supportive. Let them know, you know what? I understand that this is your relationship, but when you need help, know that I got some numbers for you. I have resources. You, as the friend on the outside looking in, learn about domestic violence, learn about sexual assault, learn those things. So when that person is ready, they always know who they can come to. It might not be today. It might not actually be next week. But long as that person knows they have someone ready and willing to help them when they're at that point that they have to get out, 9 times out of 10, that person will leave a lot sooner because they know they have support.
Awesome. Tia, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I really believe this conversation is going to help somebody. If somebody needs to get in contact or want to get in contact with you to learn more about domestic violence in your organization, can you give us that contact information?
Yes, I have a website, legacy31.net. My email address is tiapayne at legacy31.net. I'm also on all social media outlets where I try to put out a good portion of information, especially during October. I'm putting the information out there a lot, just different resources. I offer crisis intervention on the side. I do support groups. I'll meet with you. I'll go to court with you. You know, I do all of those things because I did not have those things. And then it's the added benefit that if you're in the church and you want me to read and pray with you and quote a good scripture for you, I'm going to do that as well, because it's a lot harder to leave a abusive marriage when your faith is attached to it. It's a lot harder, especially when your leadership in your church is teaching against you leaving. It's a lot harder. So that's why you have Tia Payne, because I'm going to tell you, God did not call you to be in an abusive situation. You're not the martyr for domestic violence. You don't have to have someone treat you that way just because your leadership is saying you need to stay in. And God can do any and everything in his power to do, but there's also a natural side that most people don't realize. And in that natural side of things, God wants you to be safe. And so I always encourage people, it's okay to leave. You do not have to stay. I've worked with people who refuse to leave in those situations. They just need some support, but they'll never leave that person that's abusing them. They won't do it. But just being there to be able to support them is really sometimes all anyone needs. Or in my situation, where can I find that in the Bible? You know, that was all it took for me to be able to finally leave that situation. Somebody supported me. Somebody validated the fact that I was being abused, and they didn't tell me I needed to stay and pray or submit. You know, just that simple piece of validation was enough for me, and I was able to leave and get out of that situation. So at any time people want to email, or, you know, my contact number for that is 330-322-3074. I do a lot of crisis intervention through text messages. You don't even got to call. You can simply just text the phone line. And we do a lot of crisis intervention that way. Most of the time I don't receive a call. I actually will receive a text message or an inbox message. I do a lot of crisis intervention through the inbox on Facebook for Legacy 31. So I usually have my office hours from like 4 to 10 through the day, 4 p.m. to 10. That's when my office hours are available for at least phone calls. But anytime throughout the day, if I get a quick text or something like that, I always stop and attend to those things.
So I was looking on your website and I noticed that you have women telling their story. Now, for some women who are starting over and they're trying to get back into the workforce, and maybe somebody wants to donate some business hire clothing to your organization, or maybe somebody want to give financially, how do they do
that? Most people usually contact me. I do have a PayPal set up as well, through the email address tiapayne@legacy31.net. So I do get donations. People always literally donate me clothes and shoes and toys. I always take those donations. And anytime I find somebody in need, no questions asked, you know what, I have whatever it is you need, and I'll meet with that person and drop things off. I make referrals to food banks. I make referrals to counseling. I can do all of those things just as an advocate.
Okay, awesome. Again, Tia, thank you so much for sharing your story. Um, you take care of yourself.
Thank
And
you.
this has been a great conversation. And I thank you so much.
Thank you as well.